Hi guys, welcome to our macromolecule notes. Go ahead and take a moment to make sure you have the following supplies so you can follow along in our lecture. You'll want a pen or a pencil, 2 colored pens or colored pencils would work, and then a highlighter to highlight important information as we go. After you do that, make sure you fill out name, date, period, and the assignment number. And let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about what macromolecules are. If you look at this term and you break it down by its roots, macro is the root that we use to refer to things that are big. In this case, we're talking about big molecules, and although that sounds kind of weird, in comparison to other molecules, these macromolecules are very large structures. So we're going to talk about the 4 main types of macromolecules, but let's define what a macromolecule is. So a definition, see if you can squeeze it in right here. I'm going to write it up here nice and big. A macromolecule is a large biomolecule that is built from smaller organic molecules. Organic meaning that they are made up of a certain type of elements or collections of elements. With your highlighter, let's read the text here. Life is created by small building blocks known as monomers. So we're going to talk about what monomers are for each of these macromolecules. You can think of monomers as the tiny little Lego pieces that are going to be coming together to form these larger molecules. So life is created by small building blocks, monomers, which make up larger molecules, and we call those larger molecules polymers. So when those Lego pieces do come together to form those larger structures, those are what we call polymers. And these collectively make up an organism, so they literally make up our body. Life is sustained by breaking some of these larger molecules down for energy. And we've known this, right? You eat food, and that food contains these molecules that we break down with our digestive system, and we get the energy from the food we eat. So in this unit, we'll also be talking about digestion. So let's draw a little cartoon to visualize how these polymers form, how these little building blocks come together. Let's symbolize a single monomer as a little circle. These are little Lego pieces. And they're going to come together to form a polymer where they're all bonded together. So let's show that these 4 monomers are bonded together. Each of these little circles represents a monomer, right? Remember, a monomer is a small molecule, a small building block, and we are forming over here a polymer. Those are the monomers bonded together, or a chain of monomers. And they are bonded together. We showed that with these little lines in between the monomers. Those lines represent the covalent bonds. Remember, a covalent bond is where atoms are sharing electrons, and that is what's holding this larger structure together. So next, let's read about, now that we know these monomers come together to form these larger polymers, let's talk about how polymers do the opposite, how they get broken apart. So they can get broken apart. So if you reverse the reaction we just drew up here, we need some help to do that. So we need water and enzymes to help break these polymers apart. So let's over here draw our polymer made up of our 4 monomers bonded together. On the end of this polymer, let's draw some atoms that are at the ends that are going to be important to understanding the chemistry that's happening here. So this is our polymer, right? And we can break this down with the help of water. So let's draw H2O is going to come in, a little drop of water. And we also need the help of an enzyme, which is a particular type of protein. And an enzyme is going to come in, or draw it kind of hugging the polymer there. So this is our enzyme. And when we have our enzyme and water around the polymer, we can see the chemistry happen, where this is going to be broken down into a smaller polymer when a monomer is released, right? It used to be made up of 4 little molecules, and now our polymer has 3 small molecules that are all bonded together. So our polymer now looks like this. And our monomer, let's draw some end groups. This is our new polymer, a little smaller. Our monomer that broke off. And when we do this, when we break off a monomer that was previously attached, we also release energy, right? That energy that was previously stored in that chemical bond that was just broken. So think about digestion, how we break down our molecules that we are getting in our food. We then are able to use that energy from the digestion to do the things we want to do. So let's read. Energy is stored in the bonds of molecules. It takes energy to create them, so it makes sense that energy would be released when they come apart. So know that when a polymer gets broken down into smaller pieces, right? When we get our polymer broken down into smaller pieces, we also release the energy that was stored previously in that bond. So we drew this up here in more detail, but this is a little summary to show what we're showing in greater detail above. Energy is released. Great job. Next, let's move on to the 2 types of reactions that we just talked about. When polymers are being built, when we're putting the Lego pieces together, that is known as dehydration synthesis. When the Lego pieces are being taken apart or the polymer is being broken down, that is known as hydrolysis. So let's talk about each of these and draw it out so we can understand the chemistry that's going on. Let's read right here. The 2 specific reactions that create and break down polymers are controlled by enzymes. So that's important to know, that both of these reactions are dependent on enzymes, which are things we'll talk about later this unit as well. Know that enzymes are particular types of proteins that help chemistry happen. So the first reaction, dehydration synthesis, also known as condensation. In this class, we tend to use the term dehydration synthesis, but they both mean the same thing. So this occurs when monomers are joined together, when you're putting the building blocks together, right? So a simple cartoon would be what we drew earlier. These guys come in together to form a polymer when you are building a polymer. Let's draw this out to show how this happens and how water is released. So our polymer with our end atoms shown, hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, is going to join up with this monomer. When that happens, we form water. Think about the chemical formula of water, H2O. right? So we're going to be making water over here. Where do you think this water comes from? 2 hydrogens and an oxygen. If you look at the polymer and the monomer, we have drawn out over here on the left, you can see where they're about to be glued together, right? These atoms, this oxygen and these 2 hydrogens, are going to form our molecule of water. And as a result, it's going to bring that monomer to the end of this polymer. So as a result, we have our polymer, which is now made of 4 units. Right, this is our new covalent bond that formed. And we get the water that is released. So if you can summarize maybe down at the bottom of your drawing here, I'm going to write it bigger up here. Let's summarize in words what just happened. A monomer is added, forming a new covalent bond. As a result, water is released or produced. So we are making water as we build larger polymers. This is known as dehydration synthesis. So dehydration synthesis happens whenever we're building polymers of any macromolecule. Let's talk about hydrolysis, which is close to the opposite, right? This is when we are breaking polymers down into their smaller subunits called monomers. So in hydrolysis, let's think about what that means. Hydro is a root that refers to water. Lysis is a root that refers to things that break apart. So this literally translates to break with water. So that's helpful to remember when you're trying to remember the difference between hydrolysis and dehydration synthesis. Let's draw this out. Let's draw a big polymer and show how water breaks it down. So our polymer plus water, H2O. Water is going to break one of these monomers off. Water is going to kind of come in and shove itself in between those monomer units. And let's see where these atoms are. So H2O, 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, are added. They're now right here. A hydrogen and an oxygen is on the end of our polymer. And the other hydrogen from our water is now on an end of the monomer. So they're now separated. Right? So right here, these are the molecules that came from our water. So let's annotate this. Water was added to break the polymer. Water was added to break the polymer. This is hydrolysis. Whenever we're breaking these large polymers down into smaller units, water is needed. Great job. Let's next read about the 4 different types of macromolecules, and then we'll tackle these each one at a time. So the first one, carbohydrates. These are macromolecules that are made up of sugars that are all bonded together. Lipids are made of glycerol and fatty acids. Proteins are made up of amino acids. And nucleic acids, DNA, RNA, those are made up of nucleotides. And all of these provide the matter and energy to all living things. And we get these from our diet. What we eat contains all these macromolecules, and we use them to build and sustain our bodies. So first, let's dive into carbohydrates on the next section of your notes. So this is one of 4, the first type of macromolecule that we're going to talk about. So carbohydrates contain certain elements. They contain 3 particular elements. We have abbreviations right here. So C stands for carbon, H stands for hydrogen, and O stands for oxygen. And in carbohydrates, we see that these elements occur in a particular ratio, which is pretty interesting, 1 to 2 to 1. So for every 1 carbon, there are 2 hydrogens, or twice as many. And there's the same number of oxygens as carbon. So that's where we see our ratio. When we look at the chemical formula of a carbohydrate, you can see this ratio. The little subscripts behind the element symbol tell you how many of that element, how many atoms of that element there are in that molecule. So in this molecule, which is the chemical formula of glucose, we have 6 carbons, we have twice as many hydrogen, 12 of them, and then we have 6 oxygens as well. So pretty cool stuff. It's important to know for carbohydrates, the monomers, this is worthy of being highlighted, are simple sugars. Those are the little Lego pieces that are going to come together to form our carbohydrates, or our polymers. So let's talk about some simple sugars. All of these simple sugars right here have this chemical formula, C6H12O6. They all have 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, but they are bonded in different ways. So they actually have different shapes. So let's talk about the different shapes of each of these. Let's start with glucose. We know that glucose is a product of photosynthesis. Glucose we're going to draw down here. We have a ring of carbons with an oxygen. And then off of this ring, we have all of our different hydroxyl groups, hydrogens, and more. So on the top of the carbon right here, we have CH2OH. This is getting a little cramped. Let me draw glucose over here, and you can draw it in your notes right here. So glucose. So glucose has a lot going on. You can write glucose like this, or there's ways we abbreviate in chemistry as well. I'm going to show you the abbreviation, and feel free if you want to add this to your notes, feel free to do so. You'll see in the abbreviation, we don't explicitly write out where the hydrogens are, right? So instead we focus on everything that's not a hydrogen, and we show where those groups are. So this way is often the easier way to show the differences between glucose, fructose, and galactose. And I'm going to give you guys the shorthand version of fructose and galactose. So let's find some room for fructose, which I'm going to show in yellow here. Fructose, you can draw on your notes maybe in that section. So of course there are more hydrogens coming off as well. But this is the full formula for fructose that you can draw. If you want to add in the hydrogens, they would go here, here, and here. Okay, next let's do galactose. And let's have you draw about right here in your notes. And if you want to include the hydrogens, know that they would go here, here, another way to abbreviate this is you can not draw the C for carbon. I'll just show you what that looks like. And a chemist would look at this drawing and understand that it's the same as this molecule. So at the intersections right here, you would assume there's a carbon there, and it has all the hydrogens needed to be completely bonded. So it's your preference for your notes how you want to draw these molecules, but understand that each of these have the same chemical formula. They all are C6H12O6, but the way in which these 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens are arranged in the molecule are different, which is why we come up with different names for them. So all of these are considered monosaccharides. Mono is our root that refers to one. So these are all one sugar. These are single sugar molecules. When these sugar molecules come together, they form our larger polymers. When these polymers are made up of two sugars or two monomers, we call them disaccharides. Disaccharides literally translates to two sugars. And let's show some examples. Sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose bonded together. Maltose is made up of two glucose monomers bonded together. And lactose is made up of galactose and glucose bonded together. So this is the simple form of their chemical structures if you look at my key over here. But of course, each of these little spheres is largely represented by structures that we drew like this, right? So when we have more than two sugars bonded together, we then tend to use the term polysaccharides, which is covered in our next section. So let's go ahead and read through the different types of polysaccharides. Poly is our root that refers to many sugars. So we have many sugars bonded together. These are all, in this case, these are all polymers of glucose examples shown for you. Cellulose, starch, glycogen, and chitin. So go ahead and pause and take a moment to read through about each of these polysaccharides. And when you're done, let's add some notes about them. These are all polymers made from glucose. And they have different names because of the way in which the glucose monomers are bonded together. So for example, cellulose has the glucose molecules bonded in a way where they kind of alternate like this. Starch is also made of glucose, but the way in which they're bonded together is different as well. Glycogen has these structures that are pretty awesome, but we see that there is branching involved. And these monomers kind of link together and branch to form these larger structures. Chitin has some different bonding as well, where there's also, let's erase this drawing. Chitin's more like that. And there's also some nitrogen and N groups incorporated in there. Which is pretty cool. But all of these are made from glucose, and we give them different names because of the way in which they're bonded to each other is different. Pretty cool stuff. So in the next section, you'll see that we are going to be covering the other three macromolecules. We're going to cover lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids as well. Great job. Make sure you reference this video if you need to go back to any part of the notes, or reach out if you need any help. Hope you have a great day.